When I got back to the game, I was getting very upset and confused. I thought about the way the monster looked at me. The game couldn't have heard what I said. That's impossible. It had to be a random occurrence, but why did it happen precisely at the moment I insulted the monster? Nothing about this game made any sense. The new Godzilla monsters, the weird replacement monsters, out-of-place imagery like the green temples, quiz levels, and the red monster chases. It didn't seem to add up in any kind of meaningful way. If it was a prank, it wasn't a funny in any way I could understand, and they clearly put far too much effort into it. If they were trying to make a genuine sequel with new Godzilla monsters, then why did they add everything else? Maybe it was some kind of art experiment, some group project made by a bunch of really talented and crazy people, and they lost the cartridge somehow? Or maybe they intended for some random person to find it. It was all just fruitless guessing. As far as I can tell, there was only one way to figure out what the deal with this game was: to play it through it to the end. Maybe, just maybe, there would be something in the credits, an explanation by the creators as to why they made this. Or it could be something much more cryptic and strange. Maybe even something horrifying. Before I got a good look at the Dementia board, I considered replaying Trance to see if the red monster would look at me again. But I decided against it. I wanted to keep moving forward. I was also somewhat worried that backtracking might cause the game to become even more strange. The Dementia board music sounded a lot like the Saturn music, except it was slowed down and played with a piano-sounding instrument. Like most of these new map themes, it had a dangerous, suspenseful feel. While listening to the music, I looked at the Dementia board. There were 4 boss monsters this time: Space Godzilla, Manda, Gigan, and Baragon. I was surprised that there were 2 new Toho monsters this time, but the best surprise was still to come. I started the quiz level. Here's another list of results in the same format as the last one. Quiz number 2. Number 1, can you swim? Answer, yes. Reaction, happy. Number 2, do you like fish? Answer, yes. Reaction, sick. Number 3, can penguins fly? Answer, no. Reaction, sad. Number 4, can it spin in all directions? There's no clarification of what face meant by it, so I just guessed. Answer, no. Reaction, surprised. Number 5, do you breathe oxygen? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face number 8. Number 6, does it taste good when you bite a woman? I don't know who came up with this question, but I really hope they're getting mental help. Answer, no. Reaction, annoyed. Number 7, is it night where you are? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face number 6. Number 8, do you like cats? Answer, yes. Reaction, confused. Number 9, is water wet? Answer, yes. Reaction, angry. Number 10, have you ever broken a bone? Answer, no. Reaction, happy. Number 11, do you like your job? Yes. Reaction, hurt. Number 12, would you like a new monster? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face number 11. I wasn't entirely sure at the time what face meant by new monster, but I couldn't resist answering yes, just to see what would happen. The result was mind-blowing. The game took me back to the board, and I had a new playable monster in the form of Anguirus. Ever since I was a kid, I always wanted to play as Anguirus. Since he was my second favorite Godzilla monster, and plus I never liked Mothra all that much. I moved my new Angiras piece over to the level next to it, eager to test out my new monster. Before I get into the level description, I'll talk about Angiras a bit. Using the up and down buttons, you could choose whether Angiras stood in a bipedal stance or crawled around on all fours. It wasn't a huge difference, but being able to stand was helpful in boss fights, and crawling sometimes helped dodge obstacles and attacks. He could punch and kick like Godzilla, but no tail whip. Instead, he had something far more interesting: the ability to curl up into a spiked ball of death and roll around. You could still take damage, but it was lessened. It was a good way of clearing out stage enemies, but unfortunately doing this also drained the power bar. But the spike ball wasn't his only special ability. When you press start, he would fire a beam of energy from his mouth. It resembled Tyrannosaurus's sonar attack, and if this were a hack, it may have been inspired by a roar attack from Atari's Godzilla fighting games. Also of note is that when playing as Angiras, the level meter gets glitched up. Judging by the life and power bar, I would say he's on level 10? Now on to the level. As you might have guessed from the level icon, these levels are green palette swaps of the ground and background tiles from the Blue Mountains. But what immediately caught my attention was the water, which has a transparency effect. Was that even possible for an NES game? I know the Super Nintendo could do it, but I'd never seen a transparency effect on a game on an NES. The Green Mountains music was played with the same instrument as the Blue Mountains, but the melody was totally different. It was a very simple song with a lot of abrupt pauses, followed by a loud note every few seconds. Anyway, I went through the usual strolling through the level. And again, there were no monsters or anything, but pretty soon I have reached the cliff above the water. There was nowhere to go but into the water, so down I went. The water transparency made things a bit harder to see, but it was tolerable. After going underwater, I encountered the two new enemies, a giant piranha and some kind of spiky bottle feeder thing. I liked the piranha because I could easily tell what it was. It was the same enemy design that would appear in a Wii game, and there were very few enemies like this. They didn't take much hits to kill, but they were quite annoying. It could considerably trim down your life if they got close enough. They also tend to travel in packs. As for the bottom feeders, they're easily to deal with. They swim along the bottom of the screen towards you and are easily crushed by the roll attack or jumped over. In this screen cap, you can see me about to run one of them over, and there's a pack of piranha behind it. After I beat that level, I moved Godzilla onto the blue castle icon. I started the level and got a title screen with the text, Unforgiving Hold. The level itself looked like a castle dungeon made of blue bricks with rows of identical white statue faces on the walls. These statue faces had a permanent look of horror on their faces. There was also some flickering gray static, which didn't really obscure my vision, but it adds to the very unsettling mood of these levels. The music was a 12-second loop of a low-pitched choir vocalizing that sounded very familiar to me. Whenever I played through one of these levels, I got this sudden horrible feeling of anxiety. I had the feeling that the further I progressed through the level, the closer I was getting to something unspeakably evil. There weren't any enemies, but these were some of the longest levels in the game. I only played one level, but it took 7 minutes to complete. I I didn't want to admit it to myself at this time, but I realized something playing the Blue Castle level. This game has the power to make the player feel certain things. I don't mean in the sense that you get irritated playing a crappy game or get unnerved by something scary in a game. What I mean is that certain events in this game can instantly make you start feeling something. I know that sounds completely insane. I don't blame you for not believing me. I wouldn't believe any of this either if I didn't play the game myself. But there is something very, very wrong with this game. And I still don't know how to explain it. So then it was time to fight Baragon's replacement. Although Baragon was originally the smallest monster in the game, his replacement was the largest. It was so tall and fat that the ground was noticeably lower, and not Baragon's head still barely avoided collision with the bar at the top of the screen. And he was as frighteningly bizarre as he was huge. You may be wondering how he attacks without arms. Well, he has the most powerful kick in the game. But his other fighting technique is much stranger. First he blasts a cloudy breath of pixels down at you, which causes you to freeze. Then he walks back to the right corner of the screen and extends a huge Gatling gun from his abdomen. That might seem amusing to you, but it certainly wasn't to me when I was playing the game. This attack is almost as annoying as Gigan saw, and not Baragon could have been unbeatable if he constantly used it. Thankfully, he only did it twice while fighting him. Once you unfreeze, you can run up and start damaging the gun, which does extra damage to him. This helped me to destroy him, and then it was time to play the third level type. I decided that I was going to use Angiris to fight Manda and Gigan, and then to fight Space Godzilla as Godzilla. It was only fitting. Before getting into the battles, I will describe the third level type, the Arctic. The Arctic is exactly what you would guess from the name, an icy tundra with a few watery segments. The music reminded me of a bit of Northern Hemisphere from Donkey Kong Country in 8-bit form. A very dangerous sounding song. It made me think about being trapped in a tundra and freezing to death. There were two new enemies in this stage. The first was a creature frozen in a block of ice. They block your way and you have to use the heat beam to thaw them out of the ice. They look a bit like a smaller version of Godzilla, only without the eye. When fed, they do a strange crawling movement and push you backwards. It doesn't cause any damage, but it's a bit annoying. After dealing with the Iceman, I kept walking for a minute or two and came upon a water segment. I jumped in, and this time I managed to get a screen cap showing how the water splashes when you jump in. Don't know how they programmed that, but it's pretty impressive. Another interesting thing is how the screen changes focus when you go underwater. Here you can see the other new enemy, a little thing I call Spike Walker. They walk towards you and explode randomly or instantly if you attack them, sending spikes in every direction. The spikes don't do much damage, but they did get me dangerously close to falling into a pit a few times. Oh, speaking of the pits, down into the water, the game has a platformer element, bottomless pits. There weren't any of these in the original game since it was strictly an action game, but the pits were a neat addition. After getting back on land, I encountered a very unexpected mini-boss, Myuu, the walrus kaiju. I know this game had some obscure monsters to begin with, but wow, not that I'm complaining. It's a pretty cool cameo for an underappreciated kaiju. Myuu's fighting tactics were very simple. He had a freeze beam, and he could charge into you. Not very challenging, but certainly more entertaining than the Magtango mini-boss in the original game. One really interesting thing about Magma is that he doesn't die when you defeat him. He turns tail and retreats. This was the first time I have ever seen an enemy monster change direction, let alone retreat. I tried to chase after him, but he disappeared after I got into the water. Poor bastard. And that does it for the Arctic. I will talk about the Manda fight next. I forgot to mention before, but the music that played during the new monster fights is reused from themes actually in the game. So far, the themes have been Titansaurus, Zora's music, Biollante, Fedora's music, Orga, Baragon / Moguera's music, Manda, Varan's music, and Space Godzilla, Mecha Godzilla's music. As for the fight, Manda was a fairly crafty opponent. When I realized one tactic was ineffective, it would immediately change to a different one. Manda used quite a few tricks, like spitting fire, biting, and the most irritating of all, constricting. It doesn't mercilessly drain your life down like Gigan's cutter, but it was far Manda's strongest attack. One last thing to note that I found pretty cool was that the Baragon showed up during the fight to help me out. Manda crushed it with ease, but it was still cool. After I slayed Manda, I played through an Arctic level for health power-ups, and then it was on to Gigan's replacement. When the fight started, I was very confused, because there was nothing there. I thought this was going to be like the Tansaurus fight in Paphos, but just about the time it would have been going back to the screen, or the map, a piranha appeared on screen. But it wasn't there for long. As soon as it appeared, the speakers emitted an ear-splitting screech, and not Gigan flew in and ripped the poor fish into pieces. Well, that's one way to get the player on their toes. That abrupt entrance scared the hell out of me and got my adrenaline rushing. Well, which in retrospect was a good thing, because not Gigan was one of the fastest, most unrelenting opponents in the game. Not Gigan was tough, but my new skills of Angiras helped to even the score. This was still an incredibly intense fight. Not Gigan's attacks consisted of some kind of blood razor he spews in his mouth and a downward slash. I was expecting some hellish variant of the buzzsaw attack, but thankfully there didn't seem to be one. The howl attack was invaluable in defeating him. I would have taken more screen caps of the fight, but I really had to concentrate. After that, there was just one monster left to take down, Space Godzilla. As mentioned earlier, I used Godzilla for this fight. Space Godzilla's fighting technique was rather frustrating, but immediately a very clever idea. Space Godzilla would use his energy to create two flying crystals, which would reach the ground and become crystal spires. These spires not only block you from reaching Space Godzilla, but it also allowed you to constantly recharge the full energy, and blast you with a deadly fully charged Corona beam until you broke the spires. Space Godzilla would eventually drain his own spires of energy until they shattered, but if you wait for that to happen, you'd probably lose a lot of life. Heat beams actually seemed to re-energize the spears, so you had to use physical attacks. When you finally got close to hit Space Godzilla, he was no pushover. When I punched him, he hit me back just as hard. Space Godzilla does everything in his power to knock you back to the left corner of the screen, so he can create more spires. By the time this was over, I only had about 5 life bars left, but it didn't matter because I didn't need to fight anymore. I needed to run. Here we go again. I decided right then that I really wanted to see the end of this game. As terrifying as these levels can sometimes be, I had to beat them to get through. I decided that no matter what happened, no matter what the game showed me, I was gonna get to the end. And I also made sure not to say a damned word while playing the chase level from here on. For this chase, I tried out Angiras since his roll attack allowed me to move faster than Godzilla or Mothra. The chase started off like the first two, except there was a river of blood below the ground. I was beginning to get the hang of it, and the extra speed from the roll helped me get an edge on a red monster, especially since I didn't have to worry about a power limit. It could keep rolling endlessly. Like the previous levels with water, the ground inevitably reached a stop, so I rolled off into the blood. To my surprise, the hell beast didn't follow after me. It just stopped at the edge of the ground and grimaced. I guess it can't swim, I thought to myself, so I went under blood and continued moving. There wasn't anything around, but I knew something was up. The chase wasn't going to end that easily, would it? Surely something else had to show up, and sure enough, I heard a bellowing roar, sounding slightly different. And the monster was following after me in a new aquatic body. I had no idea it was a shapeshifter. After it reappeared, the chase started to get into the difficulty I had expected. Being submerged slowed me down, putting me and the beast about the same speed. The only thing that would keep me alive was fast thinking and reflexes. I encountered some bottomless pits in which mines floated up from. I assumed that if you hit one, it would damage you and knock you back. Considering how fast the red monster swims, hitting the mines would be instant death, so I went through great effort to avoid them. But that wasn't all I had to be wary of. Halfway through the chase, the Hell Beast revealed yet another surprise. The tentacle formed of a intestine and tipped with a clawed set of jaws burst from its mouth, trying to pull me in and devour me. I only barely avoided the tentacle in the mines, but I could tell the monster was getting desperate, because the chase was nearly over. And about a minute later, I had spotted a bit of ground that served as the exit. I leaped with all the might I could muster without breaking my controller. The beast screamed with rage and jumped out of the blood river in one last attempt to drag me down, but I escaped its grasp. This time, I fell back on my bed and took a deep breath. Satisfied with yet another successful escape, now I was headed to the fifth world, Entropy. In the original game, the sixth world was Pluto. Ironically, despite being the smallest planet, Pluto was the largest and most diverse world in the game. Entropy had a different layout, but was similarly huge and diverse. The board music was played by a violin instrument, a melody that started out sounding mournful, and then it gets rather, I guess I would call it distorted. It made me feel depressed and unnerved, not something I would want to hear while trying to sleep. Strangely, none of the levels from the previous worlds were present here. Instead, there were 8 brand new icons. The bosses this time were Megalon, Batra, and Mecha Godzilla. As usual, the first thing I did was go to the quiz level for another interrogation for Face. But when I got there, I noticed something different. Instead of the usual goofy Ghidorah music, it was the password theme. The music change seemed to be intentional because after the first 2 questions at the start, the quiz started to take on a darker tone. Number 1. Do you like ice cream? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face number 1. Number 2, do you like crowns? Yes. Reaction, weird face number 10. Number 3, is time slipping through your fingers? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face number 2. Number 4, do you have any regrets? Yes. Reaction, hurt. Number 5, do some people deserve to die? Answer, no. Reaction, weird face number 3. 6, is it safe to go out at night? Yes. Reaction, weird face number 5. Number 7, do you find it hard to sleep at night? Yes. Reaction, weird face number 9. Number 8, have you ever killed anyone? Answer, no. Reaction, weird face number 7. Number 9, do you want to kill anyone? Answer, no. Reaction, angry. Number 10, are you actually accomplishing anything? Answer, no. Reaction, weird face number 4. Number 11, does life have any real meaning? Answer is no. Reaction is love. And number 12, do you like Mothra? Answer, no. Reaction, maniacal. I knew that last one was going to be a gameplay related question, but I had no idea what the result would be. I answered honestly because, as I said before, I never liked Mothra. Nobody liked playing as Mothra in this game, and there was a good reason for that. Every other time Mothra gets hit, she gets slammed back to the left corner of the screen, and she sucks at fighting because her attacks are so weak. The only benefit Mothra had was being able to fly over obstacles in some levels. So I answered no, and Face actually replied back to me, not only with the maniacal expression, but with text, "Too bad." I was taken back to the map screen, and I was shocked to see that Godzilla and Anguirus have disappeared from the board, leaving only Mothra. Face had just fucked me over. Needless to say, I was pissed, but there wasn't anything I could do, and I'm willing to bet even if I said yes, I would have been stuck with Mothra anyway. Face giveth, and face taketh away. I took a deep breath and got ready to explore. There were 2 paths I could take through the board. I decided to take the lower one. This turned out to be a good choice for reasons I'll get to momentarily. The first world ahead of me was a forest, so I started there. Almost immediately I got an eerie feeling. There was something about this level that just seemed off to me, even more than the previous ones. Perhaps it was the pitch black background I've always been afraid of being in the forest at night. Something about all these trees makes me feel surrounded and vulnerable, and the fact that I was stuck as Mothra didn't help. Playing the game's previous worlds as Godzilla gave me a feeling of bravery, being in control of the monsters. I'd be able to handle just about anything in my way, but it's not like that with Mothra. No feeling of strength or security. Now I'm just a weak, easily overwhelmed bug traversing into the unknown. Back to the level. The music had new instruments, sounding like woodwinds, followed by slow, rhythmic drums and chiming bells. Gave me this feeling that I was intruding into some dangerous place I really should not be. After a while, I encountered the first enemies of the stage, or at least I assumed they were enemies. They were strange, long-legged deer-like creatures. Instead of attacking, they were just idly walking around. I went to approach them and they ran away. I thought about shooting one with an eye beam to see what would happen, but it seemed wrong. These creatures were harmless, so I passed over them and continued through the level. About halfway through, I encountered groups of the deer-like animals and also two new creatures. A sloth-like creature with a beak climbing on a tree and hairy Raptor-X beasts that were preying on a deer. It was very surreal watching these creatures interact. I didn't feel like I was playing a video game, but rather that I was traveling through a forest in some other dimension. The creatures ignored me for the most part, although the raptors did attack me when I got too close, or if I attacked them first. I know I shot one of them to help one of the deer creatures escape. I got called at, but confrontation was easily avoided by flying up to the top of the screen. After that, I had to choose whether I wanted to play the levels with the hourglass or the TV screen. I picked the latter. What I got was not at all what I expected. When I pressed the button to start a level on the TV screen, like I normally would, this screen with an animation popped up. There was also music in the background, which was the goofy Ghidorah music that used to be playing in the quiz levels. I was somewhat unsettled by this because it was just so strange. I also found it a bit spooky because I had a shirt that looked just like that when I was a kid. After starting the animation, you can go back to the board by pressing any button. After that, I had know what to expect of the rest of the icons. I went to try an hourglass icon next. I was somewhat relieved when an actual level came up. It was certainly an unorthodox looking level. All brown with time measuring instruments floating in the air and gigantic grandfather clocks in the background. The music was the same as the board screen. Very early in the level, I encountered something else I didn't expect to see. Original enemies from the game. And not just that, it seemed to be a whole fleet of them. And the yellow tanks, which were normally immobile, can now move. I took some damage, but it was nothing I couldn't handle. But the most interesting thing about this level was the colored hourglass items. There were 3 of these. Number 1, a blue hourglass that made time slow down and filled the levels with enemies from the past. Number 2, a red hourglass that made time speed up and filled the level with enemies from the future. Number 3, a green hourglass that set time to the normal speed and filled the level with the original game enemies. I encountered the blue hourglass first. As stated, the game started to slow down and I saw the enemies from the past, which were 5 different types of prehistoric animals. I don't know much about prehistory, but I believe all these enemies represent real animals. The level went into another segment and I encountered the green hourglass, and then I fought the original enemies again. It was the same 5 types, so I didn't take any screenshots, but in the last segment I encountered the red hourglass, and the enemies that must have been from the future. Now whether or not this game was showing me 8-bit renditions of creatures that will actually exist thousands of years into Earth's future, I have no idea. But with that thought in mind, I found this particular segment to be very eerie, and it was made more tense because everything moved faster. One of the future enemies bore a striking resemblance to something I saw in a book once, called Tridon Man. Another looked like some kind of organic spaceship. There was only one of the fifth type of future creature, and when it appeared, all the others ran for their lives, leaving me alone to battle it. It could fly, but its sprite didn't actually move, and its single attack was firing a lightning bolt from its face. Even so, it was surprisingly powerful, and I suppose it could be considered a mini-boss? After defeating it, it left a health power-up that restored the health and energy I had lost fighting it, which was convenient. It seemed I would need all the help I could get to beat this world with Martha alone. After that previous stage I called Time Warp, the next stage appeared to be a toxic waste dump. As you can see, the place looked grungy and unhospitable. The music was a short looping of an ambient synthesizer song. Listening to it made me feel like I have sniffed some toxic fumes myself, and it was messing with my head the whole time. I even felt like I was choking while playing this level. The enemies all seem to be mutated to some degree. In the above screenshot, you can see green mummies with bird skulls that jump out of the waste to spit projectiles. There's also a brownish cow skeleton monster with spider legs. Halfway through the level, I even saw one of the deer from the forest. It was alone, and when I saw it, it was drinking toxic waste out of a barrel with an anteater-like tongue. I was moving over to try to make it stop, but then this flock of skullbirds came out of nowhere and started attacking. The deer was scared by this and ended up running off the ground into the toxic waste. I feel bad for it. One of the birds bit me, but I regained health quick from killing all of them. They were rather weak. I pressed onward. Of all the levels in Entropy, this was probably the most normal, in that there was little deviance from the move forward, smash things formula in the original game. I encountered more creatures through the level by tentacled blobs and some kind of deformed thing with human-like teeth. I didn't feel like provoking them into a fight, so I kept on flying near the top of the screen. I still had to deal with an occasional flock of birds now and then. At the end of the level, there was a large bluish-green lake, and there I encountered another mini-boss, some kind of a monster with a long neck and a whale skull. It attacks with a mouth projectile, and by charging into you, it also can go underneath the water and rapidly emerge from a different place. It was harder to beat than the boss from the Time Warp, and it had a lot of health because it must have taken me 3 minutes to defeat it. It let out a really loud noise when it died, and then sank back into the water as I left the screen. Back on the board, I went to the nearest level icon I hadn't seen yet, which was a white tree. As I guessed, the level was a winter-themed recolor of the forest stage. But unlike the regular forest, I didn't feel unnerved starting this one. I think the music had a lot to do with it. It was a gentle, calm song. It almost sounded romantic. It was quite stress-relieving, and the forest itself looked much less ominous, covered in snow. I traveled through the first segment, enjoying the Hemisphere for 4 minutes, when I suddenly realized something. I haven't seen a single creature since I started the level. Where are all the animals? Soon after, I left the screen and the next segment started. In the second segment, I was still in the winter forest, but now the music was gone. I was starting to feel suspicious, but then I reminded myself that there were other empty levels in the game, and this was likely another one of those. But then, I heard something familiar. It was the 12-second looping music from Unforgiving Cold starting up. I could feel my heart sink as I came across this horrible sight. It was a whole group of dead deer creatures covered in snow. Judging from the blackish blue tone of their skin, they must have all frozen to death. On closer inspection, some were missing body parts. Now I was frightened, but I still had to keep going. Before exiting the level, I was really hoping to see something resembling the previous forest animals in a living state, and sure enough I did. It was a creature much like the beaked sloth, except this thing had white fur and was more of a beaked gorilla. It was walking very slowly when I saw it, but I was happy to at least see something alive. However, it didn't stay that way for long. A pack of raptors, who must have sensed that something else was still alive, came rushing in from the right side of the screen. The beast gorilla didn't stand a chance, as one of the raptors immediately lunged at it and ripped open its back legs. These winter raptors acted far different from their temperate relatives. While the other raptors only attacked while hunting prey or when provoked, the winter raptors seemed to have all gone insane. They attacked everything in sight. One was running back and forth, clawing at nothing. Even the noises they made sounded different, more high-pitched and enraged. As I left this second segment, I even saw two raptors fighting to the death. They were both covered in injuries, and one of the raptors had been blinded in one eye. I took a screenshot, but I didn't stay to see who won the fight. I only had to get through one more segment before I could go back to the board screen. But in this segment, I was no longer in the winter forest, but instead a very empty grassy plain with a bright gray moon in the sky. The pleasant music of Winter Forest Part 1 had returned. And immediately I started to feel dread. This is gonna sound crazy, but it's the absolute truth. The game made this level from one of my memories. After a long stretch of nothing, I reached the lake, and then the moon moved down from the sky and began to hatch like an egg. When it did, a curled up humanoid figure fell into the lake as the moon halves quickly disintegrated. I heard a splash when it hit the water, then a moment of silence. Then the screen began to shake and a new creature emerged from the water, and thus I was introduced to a monster I call the Moon Beast. This was the only screenshot I took as I was focusing all my concentration on winning the fight. And it was the most difficult fight yet, stronger than any of the previous bosses. This creature would have been hard to take down with Godzilla, and with Moguera it seemed nearly impossible. I suppose I would consider myself fortunate that the beast lacked any attacks like Gargan saw, because if it had, I would have never won this. I barely had 3 bars of health when I finally killed this abomination. But what happened afterwards is hardly what I would call a reward. I've been trying to keep my promise and suppress this memory for years, but it seems as if I had to get it off my chest. This is a very painful memory for me, but the game already knows about it, and I think you should too. I'll just tell you the important parts, because I don't like bringing this experience back into my head unless I have to. Back when I was in middle school, I had a girlfriend named Melissa. She suffered from some kind of mental disorder that caused her to go into episodes. When she was in an episode, she would stand or sit perfectly straight and still, and her face would instantly lose any expression she had before. She would speak very clearly without any hint of emotion. When it was over, she would start trembling and sometimes bury her face in her hands and remain silent for several minutes. I can't really convey the feeling it gave me in words, and I won't try. You had to see this in person to understand. But despite this, she was a very kind person and I cared about her deeply. Dearly. But despite this, she was a very kind person and I cared about her dearly. We liked to hang out in a field at night and look at the stars. But one night, she didn't say anything to me at all. She just stared directly at the moon, trembling. I tried to talk to her, but she suddenly spun up and ran right into traffic. I tried to stop her, but I was too late. She got hit by a truck and was killed that night. I looked her right in the eyes when the wheels went over her neck. That sight has always haunted me. I know that the game knows about this, because after I defeated the Moon Beast, this happened.